Hi everyone, my name is Jamie Brandis and I'm with the Colorado Small Business Development Center Network's SBDC TechSource Commercialization Program. Thanks for joining us today for the first of 3 proposal preparation workshops we're hosting as part of this year's Red Team Review program. Red Team Review is a program that provides professional guidance and a final review of a company's SBIR or STTR proposal prior to submitting it to the participating federal agency. The Red Team of SBDC specialists, led by Stephanie Amond, our presenter today and managing partner of Arrowhead Solutions, a GovIRG company, will first provide guidance on proposal preparation, offer tools and templates, and finally take the perspective of the agency and apply evaluation criteria that's articulated in the agency's Funding Opportunity Announcement, or FOA, through a Red Team review. This allows the proposal to be seen with fresh eyes from a new perspective. After reviewing the team's comments, the applicant will have one last chance to edit his or her proposal prior to the agency's final deadline. The Red Team Review program will be divided into 3 rounds in 2023 to focus on 3 separate agency solicitations: NASA, which is the focus today, and then DoD and DOE. The application process has now closed for the first round, but you're welcome to sign up to be notified when the subsequent two rounds open on our website. The link will be shared after today's webinar. Very briefly, I'd like to introduce you to our state's TechSource Commercialization Program. This program is designed to support science and technology ventures throughout Colorado. Businesses are pre-startup through advanced second stage, so if you have an innovative technology, you're likely a fit for the program regardless of your stage of business. SBDC TechSource Commercialization focuses especially on sources of non-dilutive capital where there's no equity given, technology commercialization, and SBIR and STTR grants. We also cover R&D tax credits, government accounting, IP protection, access to capital, and market research. We provide customized expert consulting at no cost to you, as well as relevant workshops, events, and accelerator programs. All of our resources are available thanks to support from SBA's FAST program, VISA, the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and the City of Boulder. Just a few quick things. After the webinar, if you're interested in meeting one-on-one with an SBDC TechSource specialist or attending events, workshops, or webinars, please visit our website, which is sbdc-techsource.org, to get started. If you're located outside the state of Colorado, we encourage you to check out your local SBDC and resources for your individual state. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive an email following the presentation with a link to the recording. You'll also receive a copy of today's presentation slides. A few housekeeping things. Everyone's currently on mute. If you have questions, please type them into the chat bar, and we'll get to them at the end of today's session. We'll be leaving ample time for Q&A today. Now I'd like to introduce you to Stephanie Amond, today's presenter. Stephanie is a managing partner of Arrowhead Solutions, a GovIRG company, which is a full-service solutions provider for government contractors. Amond founded Arrowhead Solutions in 2009 with the goal of providing companies with the extra knowledge and manpower they need to succeed in the world of government contracting and startup culture. Specializing in proposal preparation, contract management, subcontracts, accounting, and compliance, Arrowhead provides skill sets not commonly available to many smaller government contractors. Amond also provides business coaching for startups, teaming and partnering consulting, and growth strategy sessions. Arrowhead Solutions is headquartered in Colorado. However, Arrowhead reaches clients nationwide. Amond is a Level 2 certified acquisition professional and possesses a BSA and an MBA. She's an advisor for the Small Business Development Centers of Colorado and former president of the board of directors for the Denver chapter of the National Contract Management Association. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining me today, joining all of us for this webinar. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can go ahead and get started with our presentation. So thanks so much for spending your afternoon, your 1 hour of afternoon with us today. As Jamie mentioned, there are 3 efforts that we're going to be working through with the SBDC, and this is the first for the year, and the focus is on NASA. And we have a lot of different folks on the line, different levels of maturity, different levels of experience with the SBIR STTR program. And so apologies if some of this is already old to you. Hopefully you'll glean something new from that if you are experienced already. And if you're not, this will be really helpful because there's a lot of information that I'm going to provide just about the program in general. Just so you can get a lay of the land, and then we'll dive into NASA specifics and of course, you know, the NASA opportunity that's open right now. So what we'll talk about first is the overview of the program, what it is, you know, what's the point of it all, how does it work? We'll kind of talk about the overview of the solicitation, you know, NASA's focus, NASA's approach. We'll talk about the eligibility requirements. Not all small businesses are eligible to participate, and that's very important to understand before you dive in. The process that we go through through the whole program and the proposal itself, the registrations required. And of course, the meat of this is probably what many of you are here for is, you know, what does a proposal contain? What's a compliant proposal? What do we need to focus on? And that includes the budget and also strategies that we need to take into account before and during the proposal preparation for NASA. First, the overview of the program. So SBIR stands for the Small Business Innovative Research Program. It is part of, or kind of aligned parallel with STTR. So they're not two completely separate programs. They're just different roles, and we'll get into that and different topics. And STTR is a small business technology transfer. So those are what the acronyms stand for. And the whole point of the program is to fund early stage R&D. And I always put tech in quotes, air quotes, because tech can be low tech, it can be high tech. In general, it just needs to be an innovative idea, an innovative, what we call, especially starting in the beginning, low technology readiness level. So it has a little bit of legs to it, but it needs infusion of capital. So in this case, from the federal government, in order to move that needle of the technology readiness level along towards commercialization. And this program is and remains and has been the largest source of early stage financing for small businesses in the United States. So this is non-dilutive capital. That's why I love it. I've seen a lot of fantastic growth with clients who have become successful in this program and eventually grew out of it. And that's the whole point. It is a 3-phase program. We can kind of talk about that here in a second, but moving from the phases, again, kind of puts you from a low TRL level to like R&D, feasibility, to prototyping, to hopefully commercialization. And the SBA is a coordinating agency for the program. So they're the ones who direct agencies' implementation, reviews the progress, reports back to Congress. But each of the agencies underneath of it administer and kind of have all of their own different roles. So that's why we talk specifically, like in this case, about NASA today. But SBA is the main information link. So if you go to sbir.gov, that's run by SBA. The goals of the program, and this is something to keep in mind as you're writing your proposal, like developing what your R&D plan will be, is to stimulate technological innovation. So the federal government has R&D needs, or they know that there are R&D needs out there. So in this specific case, NASA says, we're going to the moon, we're going to Mars, we know we need stuff. And so they really want to foster entrepreneurship and innovation because they know that so much comes out of the small business sector in that R&D space. You know, larger businesses necessarily aren't putting that much R&D funds into their own companies. And so if they increase private sector commercialization efforts, then they know that's going to meet their needs. It's going to meet the needs of the small business community. And they want to encourage socially and economically disadvantaged persons to participate. But as a clarification, there's not any extra points, for lack of a better term. If you are in any of those groups, you don't get any extra consideration. But they will ask questions about that. And they just want to still foster that, but not sure how they foster that without points. But just be aware, you will be asked questions about that. But the overall mission of this entire program, which again started back in the 80s, actually, it's been around for quite a long time, is just investing federal funds into the small business community to promote research, to promote development, and therefore support American priorities, and as well as increase the strength and resiliency of our economy. So it's a great program. It's awesome that the government actually recognizes those things. So we call it the SBIR / STTR program because they're governed essentially by the same rules, except for a couple small differences. And not all agencies have STTR offerings or opportunities, so you have to just be aware. But the difference is that the STTR program aims to partner, and you have to develop this partnership. They don't give it to you, but cooperative R&D partnerships between small businesses and research institutions. And the thought is that there are these research institutions out there, universities, research and development centers, nonprofits, that have technology that's challenging because of the nature of who they are being an institution. It's difficult to get that out into the market and commercialize it. And so if you partner with a small business, it can get out there. So it's just a different vehicle, and the relationship between the two, there's some requirements on how much each of the small business and the research institution each need to participate. And there are fewer participating agencies. So overall, there's 13 agencies that participate in the SBIR STTR program, but only these 5 here actually participate in STTR. So the rest of them do not. But there's a lot of good opportunity there to, if you have relationships in academia or nonprofit research institutions, to get good traction there. But you can also work with those same institutions and organizations under the SBIR. So just as another point of clarification. This is what SBIR is. I really want to focus because a lot of people come to us with ideas, or they have something and they want to put it into the SBIR program. And because of the 3-phase nature of this, and most often you have to enter in at this low technology readiness level, a lot of people are too far along, perhaps, to participate, or not far along enough. So this is what the program does. So non-dilutive R&D funding. It allows you to investigate, with not your own money necessarily, opportunities for commercialization of ideas. And obviously, you really only get funded for those opportunities and ideas that have a high commercialization potential. So you have to talk about that in your proposal. It allows you to diversify your revenue, particularly if you're a commercial company already, or you're already working for one particular agency and you want to start working for another. It does solve societal and economic problems. Particular agencies really focus on this. NASA, maybe not as much. They're very focused on their own problems. But National Science Foundation is one that really looks at that. It also wants us to fulfill their needs, right? As I mentioned in the beginning, each of these agencies have needs. They have goals and missions that need to be fulfilled, and the small business R&D community can do that. Furthering state of the art, that's a huge part of this. That's an element of all agencies' evaluation factor is innovation. So you have to understand what the current state of the art is in your industry, with your technology, and present to them that you're furthering that state of the art, that you're taking it further and growing it. It allows you in a lot of ways to break into government work related to the diversification of revenue. Again, if you're a commercial company, still labeled a small business eligible, it allows you to kind of start getting in that federal funding. You can definitely grow a company with this. I've seen so many success stories and so much growth with many of my clients with this program. It's super cool to see. And it is a path to sole source contracts. Sole source meaning non-competitive. So there is an opportunity down the phases, like towards the end of phase 2, that you can work with your government customer to get what we call phase 3, which is non-SBIR funding, but it continues the SBIR work, but you don't have to compete anymore. So it's really nice to have that. And they can be really large dollar. What it's not, this is not a place to sell an invention to a government. So if you have a widget and it's patented and it's already, you're trying to get it on the shelf someplace, that's not what they're trying to do here. They're trying to develop things. They're trying to do R&D. So if you have a patent or you have an invention, you can still participate, but it's a matter of what R&D are you going to be doing to continue, you know, putting this into something else or applying it to something else. It's competitive, as I mentioned before. You can't do R&D forever. So you do get graded on your commercialization success. So you can only do so many phase 1s and phase 2s before they start saying, okay, show us the revenue, show us additional investment, show us sales that you are getting from the money we've given you. So just like an investor wants to see that return. It does still require reporting. There's still audits. There's still other government regulations. So just because you're a small business doesn't mean you get away from it. And it still has policy procedure you still need to do. There's still a lot of red tape. So just be prepared for that. And it's not value engineering. Again, we're looking for innovation. We're looking for moving that needle in state of the art. So it's not just kind of incremental engineering. They'll see right through that if that's what you're trying to do. A lot of people ask me about the win ratios, you know, how likely am I to win? The latest data that the SBA is publicizing right now is from 2019. You can see that NASA for a phase 1 has a 22% selection rate. Phase 2s become more of a down select. So multiple companies will be awarded a phase 1 generally. And then those companies, usually, depending on the agency, will be down selected to compete for a phase 2, which generally only one gets the phase 2, hence the higher selection rate on a phase 2. So as you can see, it's not a huge win rate. There's a lot of proposals that go in. NASA only releases their solicitation once a year. And so some of these other agencies have more releases, but the win rates typically stay the same across all the releases. This link up here is the link to the actual NASA solicitation. You'll see an SBIR, when you go to this link, you'll see an SBIR, almost looks like a brochure, and then an STTR one. So they'll look almost identical if you read through them. Content's slightly different, rules again are slightly different, and then the topics are slightly different. But NASA's focus specifically is taking scientific discoveries, products and services, and infusing those into NASA programs and missions. So your responsibility, if you are proposing to NASA, is to really get to know NASA's program and missions. They will not fund you, most likely, will not fund you if you don't understand where your technology can be embedded. They want to know that. And they'll tell you in the solicitation and the topic descriptions, they'll give you some hints, but you do need to do some research on your own. They also want to see the potential for the commercialization into NASA relevant markets. So for example, maybe other commercial space flight programs, for example. That's a commercial market that NASA's still, you know, tied to, but NASA's not funding them. But your work in promoting NASA's missions and programs hopefully has a dual purpose in the commercial market. And NASA does want to have a societal benefit. You know, the exploration of space and expanding humans' understanding of space is a societal benefit. And so that's kind of where that tie comes in. But they want innovative and disruptive technologies. So they're looking at, okay, you're at technology, you should look up the technology readiness levels. The technology readiness level of like a 2 is where you'd start at a phase 1 and say, okay, you know, I've already kind of conceived this, but it has some legs, but I need the SBIR program to put my innovative and disruptive technology into the market. And they really do focus on the commercial potential of this. And so that's a huge part of the proposal as well, is really looking at the commercial potential of what you have. They don't want you to ask for money for system studies, market research, routine engineering, development of existing products that you already have, money for look at proven concepts that are already out there, modifying an existing product, unless you're substantially innovating that existing product. So this second to last bullet is super, super important, because this really puts you in the mindset of, okay, what is R&D? You know, what are we doing with NASA's money that's truly disruptive innovation that we can do research and development on? So at the end of phase 1, there needs to be a sound basis that, you know, you've moved that needle a little bit more, that there's a demonstration that you deserve continued funding, and that you should go on to prototype development or demonstrations. So again, I kind of mentioned this a few times. They really want you to demonstrate the technical feasibility of your innovation and the potential for the infusion into the NASA programs or in the commercial market. So that's what you are supposed to do with 6 months and $150,000 in phase 1 for NASA. And these proposals are due March 13th. You can ask questions up until March 6th. I'd highly, highly recommend you ask as many questions as you possibly can. The worst that you can get is no response at all, or, you know, just a no, we can't answer that. But it's always better to ask questions than to guess if you do have questions. We're February 1st tomorrow, so approximately 6 weeks to get this done, which is plenty enough time to work through this. And so it's timely that we're able to provide this info to you today. Back to eligibility of participating in this program. So there is this compliance guide, so you can kind of understand all of these rules in depth if you have questions. But for the SBIR program, small business is defined as less than 500 employees. And I always, every webinar I do, I always laugh at that number, because it's a pretty big company for most of the people we know and work with. All of the work, even for subcontractors, consultants, whoever, all of that work needs to be performed in the United States on US soil. You have to self-perform a certain amount. So for phase 1, that is 2/3 of the work needs to be done by your company, by your W-2s, not your consultants, your own employees, your own persons. So that's approximately 67% of the work. And we'll talk about that in the budget. Your principal investigator has to be primarily employed by your small business. And so that means they cannot work typically, and NASA has their own language about this, but typically this means that they can't work more than 19 hours a week somewhere else. So you're not eligible if your company is majority owned by multiple venture capital operating companies, hedge funds, or private equity firms. There are some workarounds to that. It's a pretty complicated rule. So if you have an interesting ownership structure, and those owners are perhaps not individuals, or not US citizens, or not small businesses in some way, you may not be eligible. So that's something you should definitely look into and ask questions. There is a allowance for joint ventures and limited partnerships, but again, you kind of have to dig into that and look at the definitions. And eventually, if you've been in this program already, you might already know this, but there are transition benchmarks, like I mentioned. So if you get so many phase 1s, they need to turn into 2s, and so many 2s need to turn into sales and revenue, and further investment beyond, so in order to continue to participate in the program. The process, very, very high level, is for you to first review that solicitation in depth, look at what it takes, and we'll talk about that. So, but just take a look, read the whole thing, determine which topic or topics that you can apply for, you know, which is the best fit for your technology, the maturity of your technology, the topic that furthers your business plans. You know, you might be able to do something, but is it really what you want to do with your company and commercialize? Then you'll need to, once you decide, yes, we're going to go for this, we see something, you'll have to do your registrations and all the certifications. The proposal is built in an online platform called EHB. It stands for, I wanted to say employee handbook, but I don't think so. It's a handbook is what they call it, which doesn't make much sense, but it is the online portal. If you've done a Department of Defense SBIR, the DoD built theirs off of the NASA one, so they look almost identical. Once it's submitted on March 13th, it'll be evaluated for a few months, a couple months, could be a few months, depends on how delayed they are. And then the selection notices will go out approximately at the end of May, potentially in June. And the number of awards are based on the appropriated funding for FY 2023. And with NASA, there's all of the different centers. You know, you have Johnson Space Center and Goddard, all of these. They sort of have to play with each other to figure out who is going to get X number of awards. So what often happens in NASA, and it's unfortunate, is that you might have a very highly rated proposal. That center really wants to give you an award, but they got beat out by another center who has priority in missions and programs who got more awards, and that can happen. So just as an FYI, you might have a really great proposal. It should have been funded, but it may not get funded just because of the limit on the number of funds that they have. The registrations I mentioned are these, electronic, there it is, electronic handbook. So sam.gov is the first one. If you haven't already registered there, you'll have to at least start your registration. But I would highly advise to get the registration completed before you actually submit. It just is safer that way. I think it's just more helpful. And when you are registering for sam.gov, or if you have, go back and make sure that these two NAICS codes are in your sam.gov registration, because these are the NAICS codes that you need to have in there to get an award. And then the EHB, you'll have to go register an EHB and get that all set up. There's a section in there that is kind of like company certifications that you will complete regardless of how many proposals you have. And they'll be updated every year when you go back in there and do a new proposal. And then you're going to have proposal specific documents to do as well in there. And then you also have to register in the SBIR firm registry, which is at the sbir.gov. And you're going to get what we call an SBC control number or control ID out of that. And that registration and proof of registration is required to be uploaded into EHB. So these are the three main ones for NASA that you'll have to do. As I mentioned, in EHB, you have these certifications and standards you need to follow. Some of them are actually for the firm, some are for the proposal, some will be not applicable. Like human and animal subjects are not allowed for NASA phase ones, but it's still in there. You'll have to read the certifications and clauses that you're going to be subject to should you get an award, so there's no surprises. If you are developing software, there are some development standards that they have, and then there's a presidential security directive. So once you get logged into EHB, you'll be able to see all this stuff, you'll be able to start completing it all and ticking things off. A lot of people ask me how to select a topic. And I kind of alluded to it before. You want to select something that obviously you can do, that's in your wheelhouse. If you already have pre-existing technology, which hopefully you do, has some legs, that you have a good pitch for how continued research on that will meet NASA's mission and objectives as stated in the topic and as discovered by your market research on NASA. And hopefully all of that continues to further your own business plan. So you may be able to do something, but do you really want to commercialize that outcome? You do, you're going to have a prototype at the end of phase 2. Is that where you want your business to head? So that's always a question. Looking at the prior awards and abstracts is a really good method to kind of understand who's in your space already in the SBIR program, who's already winning things. The abstract is a very high level public paragraph that you're going to write for your proposal. And if it gets awarded, it's going to be publicized. And so as a new proposer, you can look at prior awards and your competition, in essence, to see what they've done and see where you fit and if you think it's a good idea. You should definitely communicate with NASA when the period is open to do so, which is now, asking questions and such. And then within the solicitation, there's an Appendix C, and you'll see it when you go into the SBIR solicitation. There's a little menu on the right-hand side that has the appendices, and they give you potential transition and infusion opportunity ideas. So you're not left to just start cold. They do give you some idea on where you can take it commercialization. So kind of taking all this together is how you can determine whether or not you're good to go after a topic. And you can go after, I believe, one company can submit 10 different proposals, and you can submit 2 proposals to the same topic as long as they're significantly different from each other in terms of approach. So it is an option. This is kind of more of a list for you to take because you can have these slides afterwards, but this is what the proposal is comprised of. So obviously you're going to have contact information. The certifications I mentioned, those are electronically endorsed through EHB. The summary is that abstract I was just mentioning, so it can't have any proprietary data in it, but it needs to talk about what the tasks and the purpose and the goal of your research will be in phase 1. And it's kind of tricky to make sure you don't have anything proprietary in there. It will have proposal budget. So your budget, and we'll talk about this some more, if you are not self-performing 100%, you will have to have backup for things you're buying, including subcontractors and consultants work. The meat of the whole thing is number 5, which is the technical proposal. So this is where you talk about the significance of the innovation, why is it state of the art, what tasks are you going to complete, when are you going to complete them, how are you going to complete them, what commercialization element, research you've done, and why is this worthy of funding. And then it will also have a briefing chart, and they give you a template for that briefing chart that also cannot contain any proprietary data. If you're going to be using any NASA intellectual property, which I wouldn't necessarily suggest doing in a phase 1, but you can, you'll have to have that license application included. The technical and business assistance is something that is governed by the SBA. Agencies can elect to give you up to $6,500 on a phase 1 and up to $50,000 on a phase 2 to get technical and business assistance. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. That is optional, but you should definitely find somebody and ask for that money. If you are interested in I-Corps, there is an I-Corps interest form that is something that they can select you for. It's aimed at helping you commercialize and understand the government market and customers. It does take effort and time from you and your company. To be honest, I have only had one client in the last 15 years participate, but I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just people are too busy to participate in it. Then you'll have the firm level forms as well to complete. And then the whole thing is electronically endorsed by a small business representative and the PI before it goes in. NASA does not want letters of interest or letters of support from anybody, so don't do it. I know a lot of people think it does help in other agencies, but it does not help with NASA. So don't waste your time trying to get letters from anybody about your technology or anything. It's just not worth the time here because they won't read it. And also, they're only going to evaluate what is on the paper, electronic paper that's submitted. So don't try to like put a link to a videotape or, you know, try to put some extra slides in there or send them a product sample. None of that will be considered. Only what's actually written in 1 through 10 above will be considered, and hyperlinks are not looked upon kindly. Specifically with the technical proposal, again, this is the meat of it all. This is where the evaluation really is centered. So what's your innovation relative to this current state of the art? What is the state of art? What are you doing? What are you doing to further and disrupt your market? So we call this like the merit review, the scientific, technical, and commercial merit and the feasibility of the innovation. So they'll tell you what they need in the topic, they'll tell you what their goals are, and then you're going to come in and say, we've got this something that's amazing. We need some money to do some R&D on it. And this thing has legs. And if we have some more money, then we know at the end of phase 1 that we'll be able to get from point A to point B, or TRL level 2 to 3 or something like that. And we're worthy. Your funding is really what they're saying. You also need to provide a strategy that talks about successful development and demonstration of the innovation. So you'll have to think hard about how you're going to get from phase 1 to market. Phase 1 to NASA programs, phase 1 to, you know, commercial space flight, for example, and then phase 1 to, you know, other relevant, maybe like DoD customers or something like that. That's usually a parallel path, or airline industry or something like that. There are some potential non-NASA relevant markets that you can think of, but you do have to have a preliminary strategy in the phase 1. And that's something that trips a lot of people up. They tend to get really focused on writing on this technical and get really excited about writing about, you know, a scope of work and what they're going to do for $150,000, which is not that much money, honestly, for 6 months. And they forget this part, and this is the part that you're going to be really graded on. So make sure you leave enough time to do that market research for yourself. With regards to the budget, as I mentioned, for phase 1, 67% needs to be self-performed by the SBC. The NASA solicitation has the exact calculation on how they determine that. So pay close attention to that calculation and ensure that if you are considering using 1099s or subcontractors, that you still meet this threshold. Also, the PI has to have that primary employment with the SBC. They want to know how many hours that person's going to be working. And again, the calculation is in the NASA solicitation. For NASA, they do not want to see travel proposed. They specifically say that any meetings should be done virtually. And if there's a reason that you cannot do a meeting virtually, you have to have a really good reason and get the technical monitors, which is the government person's approval. So the easiest thing is just don't propose travel in phase 1. You will have to put a very detailed budget in. So you'll have to put people's names, education level, number of years of experience, hourly pay rate. So not like a burdened consulting sort of rate, but an actual hourly pay rate. You'll have to have backup for any materials, equipment, supplies that you're buying. You'll have to show them quotes. So everything needs to be detailed and everything needs to be justified, and including your indirect rates. So if you have fringe, overhead, and G&A, those actually need to be calculated off of hopefully a 2023 budget that you're hopefully building for your company. And those need to be applied correctly in EHB. They most likely will ask you, even in a phase 1 negotiation, they will probably ask you for backup if it's missing. They ask quite a few questions if you are selected for award, so you have to have this backup ready and prepared for them and be able to justify the numbers that you put into the proposal. So no guessing, no estimates. If you haven't hired somebody yet, but like you know you will, or there's going to be contingent, there is a way to work around that kind of with a TBD, but you still need to have like pay rates and stuff for that person. You're going to have a budget justification, so you're able to explain a lot of this. And new this year, this has always kind of been encouraged in the past, but NASA has explicitly stated now that you are not allowed to buy anything, you know, like materials or supplies from any foreign company. So you're only allowed to source domestically, which I know is a huge challenge, especially for electronic parts. So pay close attention to that part of the solicitation and read that very, very closely. I think this is going to be an interesting challenge for NASA to navigate with this explicit prohibition. Before it just said you were supposed to source domestically as much as practical, but now it just says no. So pay close attention and think about that. Typically in a phase 1, you're not buying a lot of materials and supplies because you're doing feasibility and basic or fundamental R&D. And so usually it's mostly labor anyway. Let's talk about selection criteria. So it's multi-stage. First, they're going to do an administrative review, like page count okay, got your form signed, do you have all the bits and pieces, and just kind of like compliance, really. Does the technical proposal have the 10 parts? They're going to look at the technical responsiveness, again, going back to that technical merit. And are you speaking to their topic? Is it innovative? They're going to evaluate you on that, you know, on essentially like a scale, like how good are you? How excited are they about what you're proposing? And within that evaluation, there's these 4 factors. So the scientific technical merit, your experience and qualifications in your facilities as it relates to what you're proposing to do. The effectiveness of your work plan. So this is, do they believe that you can do what you're proposing within 6 months and $150,000? And then finally, the commercial potential of what you're offering. And then there'll be a price evaluation, but to be honest, everybody just tries to get to $149,999. But it has to make sense with what you have in your work plan, your statement, your scope of work. So don't overpromise and put so much stuff in there that they know it's going to cost you more than $150, but don't put too little in there to where you're asking for $150, but it's to the reviewer, it looks like you only need $25K. There's a factor and weighting score, and I'll let you kind of review this on your own, but they have this point score, and that factors 1, 2, and 3. So everything but price are assigned an adjectival rating. So excellent, very good, fair. And then the highest technically rated proposals are then prioritized. And that's where we talk about the commercial potential once they decide something's really technically exciting to them. So then they make the recommendation, once they're prioritized, a recommendation to the source selection official. And that's kind of where all these different centers start figuring out how many awards each of them are going to get. Back to the budget and TABA. So if you haven't heard of TABA before, this is a really great opportunity to get extra money. So this is on top of the $150,000. For NASA, you have to go out and find your own TABA provider. They need to be registered with a UEI number, and generally in SAM.gov as well. But they have to write a letter. They have to talk about their experience with the SBIR program, what they're going to do for you for the money, but they can do a lot. It's really, really flexible. Essentially, the government's recognizing that if they're asking you to commercialize, that as a small business, you probably need a little bit of help. You don't have like potentially a BD team out there, or IP attorney on staff or something like that. And so this money can go to help do the commercialization. So they want you to help with better technical decisions, as it relates to commercialization, solving any technical problems or minimizing technical risks, intellectual property protections. And in addition to this, it's also, compliance with the government regulations and, regulatory plans and that stuff. Specifically for NASA, what they changed this year compared to last year is that they're not requiring, but they're really encouraging offerers to use the phase one $6,500 to have a TABA provider do a needs assessment. So like, for example, when we do this, we will work with the client to say, okay, in phase one, there's not a ton of regulatory requirements, and there's not a ton of technical assistance you need necessarily in phase one. But as you move to phase two and phase three, what are you going to need? What IP protections will you need? What systems will you need in place? What commercialization budget will you need to have for market research? That's kind of what that needs assessment is. And then a lot of people use the TABA money to help pay for someone outside of their organization to support their phase two proposal, and what that commercialization and business plan will be for that phase two proposal. And that's often what people use this TABA money for. So you'll request it in the proposal, and if you win, then there'll be a line item for you to get $6,500 that you then pass on to a TABA provider or potentially a couple TABA providers to split. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to make sure I kind of covered the whole entire thing. So I'm ready for questions whenever you guys are, if we have any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So we did have some come in already. So one of them is, can I partner with a large NASA contractor as a subcontractor?
No, the prime contractor, the one who has the contract, has to be the small business, but the small business can subcontract to a large contractor.
Got it. So this person is asking, can there be more than one principal investigator? If there's 5 of us working on the project equally, do we just have to assign one to be the principal investigator?
There can only be one. And so that person's resume needs to kind of be the strongest for, education, experience, background. That person will be kind of the lead communicator, the person who's submitting the reports, generally the person who's talking to the NASA technical monitor. So that's the person who'd be leading the research and responsible and be the POC essentially.
Great, thank you. This person is asking, is there a max indirect rate as there is with NIH grants?
No, there's no max and there's no minimum. There's no what we call de minimis. So like if you don't have a federally negotiated rate with an agency already, which we see in NIH and NSF, that's okay. So you just need to put the rate that is calculated by your company into the proposal. And that's, I think, the key. I think with the civilian agencies, a lot of times you can kind of get away with the de minimis or a guess, but in NASA, it has to be justified and has to have some meat behind it. So you can show NASA, if they ask, an Excel spreadsheet that says, this is how I arrived at the rate. And they'll say, oh, okay, then we think that's reasonable.
Great, thank you. So this person is asking, does the restriction to buy things domestically extend to software?
That's a good question. The way that it's written, it does. So, and that's, I'll talk about software for just a quick minute. Software is very complicated. So in phase one, well, NASA in general, you can generally get away with buying software because you get to quote unquote own as a licensee the software. Outside of NASA or outside of the phase ones, it gets really hairy because you're using government funding to buy software. And so the licensing and you're supposed to allow the government to be a third party to that license. And if that's really challenging, especially with a commercial license agreement, like if you just have a EULA, it's not going to say, oh yeah, the government can do whatever the FAR, the Federal Acquisition, says you can do. What I typically suggest is that if you need software, is that you buy it with your own money. And that just makes, you can use it on any program, you can use it any way you want, you don't have to worry about the license, you can use it commercially, you can use it with multiple agencies, lots of different projects. In a broad sense, and there's a lot of loopholes here, but in a broad sense, if you're buying something with the federal funds, it's supposed to be allocated just for that project. So foreign software, probably in the NASA sense, if you're going to use it for other programs in your company as a whole, outside the government work, you might want to just buy it on your own dime. And then it's included in your overhead or G&A rate that you built with your 2023 budget. Hopefully it's in there. But I mean, that's a very like specific case to probably talk about on, you know, what's best.
Great, thank you. I know it's a complicated one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this person is asking as far as timelines, if you're selected, when does the contract need to start? Maybe that's just when the work has to start.
Generally, the contract starts the day that NASA tells you, which is the day that they've finished negotiating the contract with you, which negotiations truly mean just answering all of their questions. And for the past few years, I think most NASA phase ones have started the beginning of July, and they'll all start on the same exact day. So you will start, they try to get everybody on a schedule. So even if you've answered all the questions, it might be a silence period, and then they're going to be like, okay, here's your contract. It starts July 7th. You have 6 months to get it done, because they want all the phase 2 proposals to come in on the same exact day. Your phase 2 proposal is due on the last day of your phase 1 contract. So they kind of stay on this like cadence.
Great, thank you. This person is asking about TABA providers and if NASA provides a list of them, or how you look for that.
They don't provide a list. Other agencies will have TABA providers that you can use as a resource instead of asking for additional money. The way that most people find it is Google. We've become part of this group called the GovCon Alliance that kind of provides a whole host of different TABA providers. And I know there's other alliances like that and other groups out there. So I think if you just Google like TABA provider, you'll see the big ones like Larda Institute and Foresight. Those are huge consulting companies that do provide TABA services. And so you kind of just have to shop around. And I know you guys know TABA people too. They're at the SBDC that you can share.
Yes, thank you. So we have a ton of questions coming in. I'm going to try to get to as many as we can. So this one question is, should we in parallel submit our idea to NASA in their online pitch platform, or is there a downside to do this, e.g. if NASA doesn't like the idea?
I don't think there's a downside to that. Just likewise, I don't think there's a downside to submitting your idea if it has applicability to multiple agencies too. So I do know people who will try to submit a pitch or even a full proposal to NSF at the same time as they're doing a NASA, or there might be a DoD applicability at the same time as NASA. Your only thing, if you do something like that, not with the pitch to NASA, but if you are doing multiple proposals, is that you have to identify in the proposal whether or not a similar proposal was submitted to another agency. And you just have to promise that if you get one award, you're not going to accept the other. So you can't double dip to do the same project. But the more opportunity you have to put a proposal out there, put an idea out there, the better. It's not going to look bad.
And you had said that you can submit up to 10 to NASA, it sounded like. So if you were awarded more than one, can you accept more than one with that?
Yeah.
Thing?
Yeah, as long as they're not the same. You know, I know larger small businesses that will put in 10 proposals, and they might have 2 on this topic and 2 on this other topic, but they're all different. There's different PIs because it's a larger small business. But as long as it's not the same exact idea to NASA, then they're okay with it.
Great, thank you. So this person has some questions about the technical proposal part of it, I believe. They're asking, are pages in the references section included as part of the 19 pages? And then it's also kind of a general question about the audience that you should be writing this to. You know, should it be towards technical experts or, you know, different audiences for different parts of where you're writing?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember specifically on the NASA one. Most often, if there is not a separate references document or section in the technical proposal, like a header, you know, it says references or whatever, or a document that you upload in a separate section for references, which is not the case with EHB. Most people put citations in the footers, and there's not like a references list unless they ask for it. With regards to the audience, you're going to have people who are very well versed in your technology. Most likely, they will be able, like if you met them at a conference, they would be able to be talking to you and understand. So it's not necessarily a layman. And those same people have probably a less strong understanding of commercialization potential. So you really have to guide those people into believing that there's this commercialization potential and that these things are actually, like, you have relevant data, you've really thought about it, so that, like, if those same technical people were investors, like a Shark Tank situation, that they would say, oh yeah, I get it, you know, yeah, you totally have thought about this and this is a good return on investment. But mostly you need to get, you know, these technical people, because they will poke holes in your thought process. They will say, you know, you didn't think about this, or I don't consider that to be state of the art, or you know, this other technology probably works better than what you're telling me you're going to do. So what sometimes people do is they do research on the center. If they can find names of the technical monitors, you know, they actually like research, you know, if they provide publications lists and like other relevant documentation for you to go look at, they go look at the authors for those just to see who those people are, and just really do a lot of sleuthing. But really write as though you're talking or presenting like at a conference of your peers.
Great, that's really helpful. So this person, I think we have time for one more question. They're asking about SBIR Ignite, so how that might differ from the regular solicitation.
We probably don't have time to get into that right now, but it is its own thing. It's its own different proposal process and all of that. It seems like each of the agencies are kind of doing these little tiny different spin-offs of SBIR that are a little bit more cool than the traditional one that we've been doing since the 80s. So, you know, that's kind of NASA's version of it. But none of what I said today really applies to the Ignite. Like, that's a different beast with similar roots, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's helpful. I'm sure we can do a whole nother something on that at some point.
Yeah, probably.
All right, so I know we're about up on time. So Stephanie, is there anything you want to leave us with? Some closing thoughts?
No, I think the biggest thing is make sure you pick a topic that fits you and your business plan, and ensure that you really are proposing something innovative and state of the art. Like, pay close attention to a couple of my slides that really says what they do not want to see, and, you know, make sure that it all makes sense for you and your business before you put the effort into putting something like this together.
Great, good advice.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks for everybody's hour. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank
for
you
the
so much,
SBDC.
Jeannie.
You're welcome.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.